Testing, 1, 2, 3. I guess I don't really have a sound guy on this Zoom thing. Hello and welcome, YBGers, to Managing the New Normal, the 4th annual EdTalks, back by popular demand. We took a year off last year for something else, but everyone loves this format, so here we are. My name is Jennifer von Berendt, and I'm a designer at Dialog, and I will be moderating today's event. My sole qualification in this role is my astute ability to color coordinate my mug with my blazer. Anyhow, we've missed you, YBGers. This is our first event back since the world turned upside down, our first event of 2020. It looks a little different than usual. We're used to getting together at the Hotel Mac or some other lovely establishment. I would ideally be able to see you all, and we'd be mingling and networking over a tasty beverage together afterwards. Nevertheless, here we are in Zoomland, and we are still a community. I can see everyone populating the chat. Shout out to Ben Atchison, what's up, how are you? There's a ton of other people just logging on right now. We're watching the numbers climb. This is a really neat platform. So the premise of the YBG, as most of you know, is to bring together people in the first half of their design and construction related careers to get to know each other. And today we're going to interact to continue to foster that sense of community. EdTalks is a very clever spin on TED Talks. Bet you didn't know that, with the purpose to teach us something outside of the construction industry, because we know so much about what we do, but let's go outside and create a common language that we can then all use to be more well-rounded and interact together as people and professionals. So for today, the format of our 1.5 hours together will be the following. We have 3 fabulous panelists, each with a presentation of sorts to touch on one of our three themes, and that is corporate stuff, HR. It's a lot more than that, but that's the label I'll give it right now. Work-life balance as well, and the silver linings of our current global pandemic-induced situation. You might know our panelists. They are Lana, Leeb, Rohit, Handa, and Jared Smith, and I'll introduce them in a minute in more depth. But we're then, after we go through those themes and presentations, we're going to move the latter part of the event into a really spirited Q&A with all 3 of them. It's going to be a really candid conversation. We're really just going to toss the ball back and forth, answer your questions, and get real about what we're currently experiencing, some of the advice that we can give each other to succeed in our new normal, and everything related to that comes up. So today's interactive. Ask questions, use the chat function to ask questions. We like the chat function for questions because everyone can see those questions that are feeding and scrolling, and it really does provoke a lot of thought and makes us more interactive. So please jump in there, comment, question, anything you got, just let's have a conversation. In fact, to demonstrate just how interactive today will be, we're going to start off with a poll. I don't know if all of you have used the polling function on Zoom. It's pretty easy. A poll is just going to pop up, and you just need to check one of the options. So very serious, important question related to our times. Hey, Jonathan, in the background there, can you cue the poll? Are you wearing pants right now? Okay, so actually I just had a burning desire to know. The rest of my panelists discouraged me against this, but I have the power right now. So if you could please just check the box. I didn't put a box for yoga pants, which I probably should have, because that's what I'm wearing. So I'm gonna say yes for pants, submit. And we'll give everyone about 10 more seconds to check the box, answer the question. It's totally anonymous, so you can be honest. And then Jonathan's going to close up the polling in 3, 2, 1. Can you pop it up on the screen, Jono, for everyone to see? Okay, I wasn't expecting that. I wasn't expecting that. That's great. Thanks, guys. Okay, we're gonna do another one of those later on. Might be a little bit more of an important question. Okay, so we're gonna jump right into it now. We're gonna start off with Lana Leeb. So we can pop up Lana's video on the screen there so that everyone can see her lovely face. I'll tell you a little bit about her here. So Lana is the founder and president of Atled Consulting. Hey, Lana, how are you?
I'm doing good. How about yourself, Jen?
Very good, very good. Very comfortable in my yoga pants over here. Yeah. So thank you for being here. We're really excited to chat with you, pick your brain. I've only seen a snippet of your presentation, so I'm really excited to learn a lot of great things that are really going to drive our conversation today. So your company that you founded, you partner with CEOs and executives on human resources, change management, communication strategies. A little background about how Lana got here from a credential standpoint. She attained her MBA from Southern Cross University in Australia. That wasn't an Australian accent, but let's not go there. Her BA from the University of Alberta and master's certification in HR from Cornell University. She's designated as a chartered professional in human resources, ProSci certified, and an active member of the Association of Change Management Professionals. I imagine those professionals are going to be really busy for the next couple of years as the shifts. So also, everyone in the audience, you're quickly going to see that Lana is far from your standard HR talking head reading a policy book to us. She is a thought leader and a businesswoman first and HR professional second. Her mission is to democratize and simplify HR for employers. And she intersects legal obligations, talent management, workforce planning, and human capital analytics. Wow, that's a lot of things to provide clients 21st programs. And maybe that meant 21st century programs.
Maybe, yeah.
Anyhow, that's the lovely Lana, and we're so glad that you're here today. I'm going to turn over the floor to you, and you can just jump right into it. We're going to sit back, learn some things, type some questions and thoughts in the chat while you're chatting, and then I'll circle back with you after.
Fantastic. So thank you, Jen, for that warm introduction, and I certainly hope for all of you I'm not going to come across, as this talking head in HR. When tapped from the ECA to talk about the new normal, I knew I didn't want to just talk about, I knew I didn't want to just talk about, trends over the next 1 to 6 months, but also some trends to look out 1 to 5 years out, as well as 5 years and beyond. And here's why. I think the YBG is this collective of high performers and really the future generation. And so as you scale the C-suite or even open up your own shop or already a business owner right now, I think it's going to be prudent to have certain things on your horizon. And I think for the first, 1 to 6 months, some trends that we are going to see intersect, human resources as well as some, relevant legal concerns, and in particular with remote working. So I do want to talk about there is this silver lining even when discussing constructive dismissal, because if there's greater transparency on the rights and responsibilities for both employers as well as employees, organizations and employees can remain whole and minimize some of those claims over the next 1 to 6 months. So let's unpack that right now. For a constructive dismissal suit to have some legs behind it, it needs to be a breach of a contract, but it also needs to be a breach of an essential term within that contract. And this is where it comes and bumps up against COVID-19 and remote working. Location. Location can be considered a fundamental term of a contract. And so we might start to see constructive dismissals come through on 2 accounts. If employers continue remote working and they open up this model going forward, it could trigger constructive dismissals. We know that there are those employees who love to be at work and they want to go back to work. We also know that you don't know what happens behind closed doors. And so there are those cases of domestic violence. And for those people, going to work every day is literally their lifeline. And so those are 2 camps, but there are those groups that want to come back. And those people would have never applied or accepted a position if it was permanent, full-time from home. That would be a fundamental breach. Inversely, if employers completely recall their employees back and reintegrate their employees, this could potentially be seen as constructive dismissal. For example, we know that there are those companies that have announced they're not recalling their employees back until 2021, or potentially until a second wave hits us in the fall or Q1 of 2021. And that could be a long time, 6 months to a year, or even 18 months if we wait for a vaccine. So that could be a breach based on their current employment and their current location. Second thing, and this is where it's tricky, if companies have not explicitly and consistently communicated that, remote working is only a byproduct of COVID-19, that you will be recalled back, and moreover, we're going to be reintegrating you based on, factors X, Y, and Z, it creates this gray space where employees start to think, this might be my new reality, or this might be something more permanent. And so it's going to be really critical over the next 1 to 6 months that employees communicate if you're going to be recalled or you're going to be open to more remote working opportunities. So before I turn it over to sort of some trends over the next 1 to 5 years, I want to talk about also how COVID-19 was almost this great revealer, in particular for leaders. I think that if they're going to have to manage over the next 1 to 6 months and really define what their philosophy is on remote work. And if they completely recall their workforce back, their storyline is going to have to fundamentally change. Because the pre-messaging before COVID about maybe we don't have the technology, it would kill our culture, we would see like a dip in our service levels. Throughout COVID, you might not have seen those. And so you can't go back to that same messaging, and leaders are going to have to really come up with what they're going to tell their employees in a post-COVID world. I think another reveal that we'll see, and that happened throughout COVID-19, is that leaders almost felt like the emperor with new clothes, a bit naked. You take away maybe the corner office and the suits and sort of that built-in infrastructure of a power dynamic, and you compound that with technology like Slack or instant messaging, and it instantly flattens an organization, and with that, typical power dynamic. And so I think over the next 1 to 6 months, regardless of what CEOs and executives decide to do, they're going to have to exert influence in new ways that they've never had to. And I think for us as employees, it's going to be important to provide them the space as well as the support for them to renegotiate that over the next 1 to 6 months. So moving on to the next slide and talking about some other trends to look out for. I think over the next 1 to 5 years, organizations and employees will shift from preserving these legacy workforce strategies and pioneering together new models. And I think that there's these trends that have existed in the underbelly of HR. And with remote work, it's almost like COVID-19 sort of picked up this rock, and these trends have come to the forefront. And there's no going back. You can't just kind of put that back rock and sort of back away. I think they're here to stay, and I think that we're going to see more exploration around them. And they all have to do with two things. One is illusion, and the second one is collision. So for illusion, I think the first thing we're going to see, again, over the next 5 years, is this illusion of power that both employers and employees may think they have. For example, when we look at remote work, if it is here to stay, employers might start to implement tracking software for their employees, ActiveTrack or TerraMind or Time Doctor. And what that could result with is that some organizations might start to operate under this illusion of power and managing through control and surveillance rather than managing through character and trust. And I think that if there's those executives or managers who don't receive proper guidelines through IT or HR or even training, we're going to see a loss of intellectual property and some of their best and brightest leaving because that is not the culture that they signed up for or that they're liking seeing the changes in. And so it's going to be important for HR as well as employees and leaders to figure out how to maintain trust with some of this surveillance. An alternative impact is for employees who operate under the illusion that they're going to navigate their careers the same way, especially with remote working. So we know that for young, ambitious, high-performing individuals, access to sponsorship and influencers and mentors is critical when navigating the career, in particular for women and people of color. And so in this new remote world, while you're going to be enjoying the flexibility, maybe more work-life balance, you're going to have to ask yourself, how do you get access to decision makers, especially for long-term growth? And I think it's also going to be interesting over the next 1 to 5 years to see how HR is going to step up and to reprogram a mentor and mentee relationship even if it's like a 3-month-long standing Zoom meeting where people can pop in and pop out for learning through osmosis. But it's going to be critical for HR to provide some opportunities to ensure that young professionals get access to key decision makers in the company. Third trend is, I think there's also going to be this illusion from both the employer and the employee that they are handcuffed to their location, right? In 5 years' time, we're going to see the rise of the boundaryless employee. And I think that we're no longer going to be constrained geographically, and that illusion is going to be sort of blown up. Companies are going to have greater access to talent, not just within the Edmonton market, but Calgary, nationally, as well as stateside. And inversely, employees as well. I think their prospects over the next 1 to 5 years will equally expand because they might be attracted to other companies outside of Edmonton and will be poached. And so this war for talent will be amplified further with opportunities for the organization as well as for employees. I think another illusion and a trend that we're going to see is this illusion that workforces will continue to flock to magnet cities. So if remote work is here to stay and we do see the boundaryless employee, the byproduct may be geo-arbitrage. And what I mean by that is employees will still receive the same amount of salary, but to get more bang for their buck without having to flock into a magnet city, they might start to relocate. And, you know, I'm not talking about geo-arbitrage where we see entire workforces crop up in Koh Samui, Thailand, working for Edmonton firms, although for me, I would love that. But we may see arbitrage where there's this hollowing out of the middle class within Edmonton, moving to younger municipalities. And so I think that organizations are going to have to realize that employees may no longer decide where they're going to live and where they're going to raise their family on where their employer is or where the opportunities are. And so that power dynamic also may shift. I'm going to talk about 2 collisions that I think is important for all of you to know about. I think if remote work is here to stay, we may also see this collision with compensation. So typically pay grades within HR are based on your education and your expertise. And then there's usually a top up for standard of living cost or commuting. You know, and in Edmonton, it might be 1 to 5% compared to say New York, which might be 10 to 15%. But with remote work and the perks that you receive from that, you might see a scale back in compensation over the next several years. I'm also going to talk about a collision that I think is important to have on your radar. And, you know, we're familiar with this traditional employer-employee workforce model that I think most of our career has followed. But there is this polar counterculture workforce called the gig economy, which is based on contractors and freelancers and gig-based workers. They are all project-based. And we know that this is dramatically rising, not just within Canada, but globally. And we also know that similar to remote work, it's not going anywhere and it will continue to grow. So what does this mean? I think over the next 5 years, we're going to see the rise of an ambidextrous employee. A players, top tier talent within our organizations, most of you on this call right now, are going to start to swing and become more fluid and tap into this workforce over here. In particular, if your organizations don't learn from COVID and don't preserve the great things that came from it, you know, potentially remote working or a 4-day work week or providing you more work-life balance. Currently today, there are over 100 platforms that serve as brokers, and some of them brokering Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies like Microsoft and Airbnb and Gucci with project managers, architects, designers, marketers, lawyers, change managers, right? And so I think that we're going to start to see individuals swinging over here, tapping into it and become businesses of one for themselves. Inversely, I think organizations will also start to wonder if they haven't already tapped into this, what's going on over there? When we look at remote working and when they start to see that they've saved on fixed costs to real estate footprint or workstations or parking costs in downtown Edmonton, they might start to also question where else they can save on overhead costs. We also know in the future, speed and agility will be the king and queen, and that's going to be how they can compete. So, you know, recruiting and then onboarding and then training, which typically take 3 to 4 months, is going to go by the wayside. In particular, when there's this polar workforce over here that will allow organizations to mobilize 6 to 7 high-performing experts deep within their vertical to come together for a moment in time, whether it's for a project or for a client need, and then release them without paying severance. And so I think that when there's a win for organizations about saving costs and competing with speed and agility, as well as employees recognizing that they can pick the project and the companies that they work for, we're going to see both of these trends rise and collide and potentially mesh and overlap. I think also right now this workforce is highly unregulated and they don't have the same rights and protections that this typical model has. And so I think that both of these workforces will learn and extract the best of it. So out of all those trends that I pretty much just rambled on, I think the biggest takeaway for all of you over the next 5 years is that this traditional employer-employee model that we've had for the last 50 to 75 years with traditional power dynamics will be fundamentally altered. And for me, the silver lining with COVID-19 is that we have the opportunity to learn these trends, amalgamate them, and resew together a different model that benefits the employer as well as expectations that are advancing from our employee base. I'm on to the last slide, and I'm only going to touch on this, but I think, 10 years out or even 15 years out, the last trend that I'm going to talk about is the next disruption that's about to happen. And I think like COVID, which was this massive boom and a forced shutdown to our economy and our workforces, the next boom and the next disruption is going to silently creep up and almost let itself into the back door of our businesses. And this is the fourth industrial revolution. We'll see advancements within artificial intelligence, automation, 3D printing, machine learning, blockchain, all of that. And in Canada, it is predicted that by 2040, 30% of the workforce will be obsolete. And you got to let that sink in, because we're not talking about data entry clerks. We're talking about buildings being built through 3D, so that will impact construction. We're talking about accountants and lawyers and human resources. Yeah, like I'm on the chopping block. But the flip side of that is that it will also introduce brand new sectors and industries and new positions within the market. And so when I think about COVID-19, I think personally that it was this beautiful blessing in disguise, because for our generation, we were able to cut our teeth and learn how to navigate through disruption where there was no precedent. And this next boom, this next disruption, there won't be either. Number two, I think COVID-19 also taught us that even with technology, human connection and relationships are irreplaceable. And so when we look at, and it's going to sound a bit Terminator, but the rise of the machines, I think COVID-19 reminded us and prepared us to say, yes, let's benefit from that, but also ask questions around human dignities and ethics and governance when utilizing some of these advancements within technology. So I just wanted to plant a few seeds around some trends that you'll see, not just over the next 1 to 6 months, but really coming out of COVID and ensuring that yourselves as individuals are armed for the new reality, but also how to best reposition your companies to meet that. Thanks.
Thanks, Lana. Thank you. That was fantastic. Whew, it's like drinking from a fire hose.
Yeah, I'm going to have a sip of water right now.
Yeah, I mean, to summarize, it sounds like what you're saying is that there was a huge shift. There was a shift coming slowly in the way that we work, but the COVID-19 was an incredible catalyst for that shift. Would you say that's correct?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and the fact that you've sort of socialize it as COVID might be disruption 1.0, and the fourth industrial revolution is disruption 2.0, which is definitely on a larger scale and maybe even more invasive and more fundamental than disruption 1.0. Is that a correct kind of analysis there?
I think COVID-19, like with our economy, and also when you think about the fatalities around that, unlike the fourth industrial, I think there's going to be not so much of a hit to our economy and hopefully replacement of other industries and sectors. So it's not so doom and gloom. It's just something to kind of scan and make sure that you're on the right side of it as it comes.
Yeah, so that's a great positive perspective in terms of people who are really struggling with the uncertainty and the disruption of what we're going through today. I just want to ask you one question that came from one of our attendees. The question is, how do we navigate or approach the conversation with our employer about potential work from home if the entire workforce is back in the office? Now, we're going to get into all this stuff in our Q&A at the end here, but just wanted to put that one out there because it popped up and is very topical.
Yeah, great question. I think first off, you want to have that conversation directly with your leader. But I think with anything in business, make a business case. I think if you're able to demonstrate my productivity didn't dip, there was an uptick in my service levels. I continued to broker conversations with my leader and my teams. I was actively collaborating. I think it's going to be a hard sell for them to come back and still say no. So I think, and we can unpack this more with Jared and Roddy, because I know they also have ideas, but I think have that conversation and make a business case for yourself. You don't need to advocate for the entire company, but there could be an opening for you.
That's great. Yeah, I'm sure we'll get into some more nuances of that in the Q&A. Thank you so much, Lana. So I'm going to bring you back at the end when we do Q&A, and we're going to shift over to Roddy now. And just kind of take a different spin on the conversation. So now that we have all of that goodness that we can think about, Roddy really is here predominantly talking about work-life balance, but can speak to all of it as well. So if you all don't know Rohit Handa, let me just introduce him here. So Roddy is a lawchitect. What is a lawchitect, you asked? It's somebody who is a registered architect and a bar certified lawyer. So he is many other things, including a husband, father. He's an entrepreneur, travel enthusiast, problem solver of all types. Roddy founded a company called Holo-Blok. It's a very uniquely structured architectural firm, which he's going to tell you more about in just a minute here. One of the notable features of Roddy's firm that pertains to our conversation today is that from day one, years ago when he started this firm, all employees have always worked from home. So we consider him our resident guru at work-life balance. Maybe, we'll find out. He was voted by his graduating class as the most likely to invent cold fusion and chair the UN. Roddy is always surprising people. He actually wasn't voted for those things, I just made that up. But he's very interesting and brilliant, and we are very excited to continue the conversation today with him. How are you doing, Roddy?
Good, how are you?
Very good. Thanks for being here. So,
thanks for the invite.
Yeah, I want to just turn it over to you so that you can give us a little bit more insight into yourself, into Holo-Blok, into work-life balance, and all those good things.
Sure, yeah. I've got a bit of a PowerPoint. It's just 2 slides long, but it kind of sets the stage for why Holo-Blok exists and where the inspiration for Holo-Blok really came from. So maybe at this time we can throw the PowerPoint up. And my story starts with a sandwich. Back in 2005, I started going to architecture school down in Missouri. Don't do the math because I'm probably on the edge of YBG in terms of being in the first half of my career. I'm hoping I'm near the last half of my career at this point. But I never realized until recently how much this sandwich impacted my life and really changed my perspectives on what I wanted out of a career. It changed me in 2 real ways. The first was, it was probably 1/3 of my freshman 15 eating this sandwich regularly. And the second way was, every time I went to this restaurant, which was Jimmy John's, it's a pretty popular chain in the US that delivers sandwiches, which is obviously ideal for college students. There was always a story on the wall, and I was able to find a video about that story that I'll ask to be played right now. But this really put everything into perspective for me on what I wanted out of my career, and why was I working in the first place? What were my goals? So it's a pretty good way to set the table. You can go ahead.
A small boat with just one fisherman had docked, and inside the boat were several large yellowfin tuna. The American complimented the Mexican on the quality of his fish. "How long did it take you to catch them?" the American asked. "Only a little while," The Mexican replied in surprisingly good English. "Why don't you stay out longer and catch more fish?" asked the American. "I have enough to support my family and give a few to friends," the Mexican said as he unloaded them into a basket. The American was visibly puzzled. "But what do you do with the rest of your time?" asked the American. The Mexican looked up and smiled. "I sleep late, fish a little, play with my children, take a siesta with my wife, and stroll into the village every evening where I sip wine and play guitar with my amigos. I have a full and busy life, senor." The American laughed and stood tall. "Sir, I am a Harvard MBA and I can help you. You should spend more time fishing, and with the proceeds you would get from selling the fish, you could buy a bigger boat. In no time, you could buy several boats with the increased haul. Eventually, you would have a fleet of fishing boats." The American continued. "Instead of selling your catch to a middleman, you would sell directly to the consumers, eventually opening up your own cannery. You would control the product, processing, and distribution. However, you would need to leave this small coastal fishing village, of course, and move to Mexico City, then to Los Angeles, and eventually to New York City, where you could run your expanded enterprise with proper management." The Mexican fisherman asked, "But senor, how long will all this take?" To which the American replied, 15 to 20 years, 25 tops." "But what then, senor?" The American laughed and said, "When the time is right, you would announce an IPO and sell your company stock to the public and become very, very rich. You would make millions." "Millions, senor? Then what?" Now this is the best part. You could finally retire and move to a small coastal fishing village. There you would sleep late, fish a little, play with your kids and take a siesta with your wife. You could stroll into the village in the evenings where you would sip wine and play guitar with your amigos. Interesting story, right? A lot of people want to make more money so they can live a better life. They tell themselves, once I make enough money, then I'll go live the life I want. But that's a mistake. Living the life they want should be accomplished now, not later. They spend the majority of their lives working, but along the way they often forget what they're working for. They start to prioritize work and making more money without a reason, and that's a problem. They just want to have more and more with no apparent end goal. The Mexican fisherman's story is here to remind you to take a step back and think about what you're actually working for and what you already have. Every so often you should reflect on and reevaluate your priorities. There is more to life than just work and money after all. Don't get me wrong, having money is a necessity and working hard is a positive trait, but you shouldn't blindly chase money just to have more of it. I think it's important to have a clear vision of what you're working towards so that one day you're actually able to say, I have enough and I don't need more. Thanks for watching. If you liked the story, share it with someone who might benefit from it. I want you all to become better than yesterday.
Thank you, Jonathan. So that really set the stage for what Holo-Blok was going to become. All of us that work for Holo-Blok were independent contractors, and we all worked at pretty large international firms. And we found it very difficult to be creative between the hours of 8 to 5, especially in an industry like design, where sometimes you're inspired outside of those hours. Well, more often than not, you're inspired outside of those hours. So we made a conscious effort to really prioritize all the things we wanted to do today and still make a living and see if we could make an honest go at it. And I think we faced a lot of backlash at first, especially not having physical offices. But it's kind of ironic now with COVID hitting. We're kind of being looked at as with a bit more praise from the same people that criticized us, that we were so ready to take this on and didn't really experience an interruption in our business cycle.
Interesting. Jono, if you could bring me back, I want to ask Roddy some questions here. So had a couple other questions pop up here that I think are best to ask you now instead of waiting for the Q&A. Just fascinating story. Thank you so much for sharing. What was the year that you founded Holo-Blok?
We turned 3 in January, so it's been 3 years.
Okay, and you weren't necessarily reading all of Bill Gates' stuff about how this pandemic was going to happen. You really just thought it made a lot more sense for your business model. Honestly,
it was probably the worst timing because my daughter was actually on the way. So with that in mind, I knew that going to work at 7 in the morning, getting home at 6, and seeing her for an hour a day wasn't going to be enough for me. So probably a little naively, I decided, oh, what better time to start a business and not have an income than when my wife's pregnant. But it all ended up working out in the end, and now I get to spend as much time with them as I want to, which is great.
Yeah. So was reducing overhead one of your factors in the decision to run your company from home, or was it really about control over your time?
No, I mean, there was a lot of factors that played into that decision. And one, I think the most passionate one was design motivated. We found it was really difficult to work in a really big corporate setting just because there is a lot of waste that comes along in the form of big overhead. There's lots of rents, there's lots of equipment and software that people aren't necessarily using. The way we're structured, everybody's responsible for their own systems, everybody's responsible for their own software. So we run a really lean operation. People don't buy software just so they have it on their computer. You only purchase the software you need to be productive in the tasks that you have. So what we wanted to do was drive more of that project revenue and value back into the project and the design itself. And if we free up 15 to 20% in overhead that we were seeing at some of the bigger firms, that was a ton of extra design, extra rigor we could put into our process.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. I'd like to ask you a tougher question though. Are there things that you've come across that just really can't be done remotely? For example, some kind of collaboration you need to do with your team or client meetings. Have you discovered that even though your process is working very well, there really is a 5 or 10% that just has to happen in more of a traditional sense?
I mean, I would almost say we actually collaborate in person more than we did in an office. Whether that's just through a Slack message or an impromptu Google Hangout, we're able to just be very deliberate with our time and make sure that we're not wasting a bunch of time migrating to a boardroom to get everything set up on a screen. And there's a lot of waste in just that process of congregating people in an office. When we really want to get together and start sketching, we find design to be such a social process. We quite frankly just go to a pub, grab a beer, throw out some sketch paper on the table, and let the ideas flow. We want that fluidity in our design to shine through. And sometimes it's hard when you're doing an 8 to 5 grind every day in the same location. You lose a bit of that energy that you wish you could keep throughout your whole career, but it does get stale depending on the projects and the tasks you're doing. With our format, it seems fresh every time we get into a room together. Everybody's so motivated. It's a change from our current daily grind of waking up late and sleeping in and having a siesta with our wives and drinking wine and playing guitar all day. But it has turned into such a positive experience every time we collaborate on a project. We get so much done, and it's more of a social atmosphere than it feels like work.
Interesting. So I have one more question for you before I transition over to Jared before our Q&A. And it was actually spurned by the tracking software comment that Lana made. And then based on what you're talking about in terms of your structure. So while the structure sounds amazing, there's probably a certain amount of people that it might be difficult for. So it would take probably a very focused, self-driven, self-motivated person to be able to manage that kind of lean operation. What would be your advice to people moving into a new kind of normal that's more like the structure of Holo-Blok, but they're not necessarily as adept at that kind of self-direction. Do you think a tracking software is something that would be good for employers to use? And so I asked you like 8 questions there, so you can just run with that.
You know, I'm never a fan of that tracking. It almost breaks down any trust that you have with your people. And if that trust doesn't exist, you're better off making a clear break between the company and the employee, in my opinion. The way we try to self-motivate people is we're all performance-based. So regardless how much time you spent on a task, you're going to get paid the same amount. So there's an incentive to do things right the first time, and there's an incentive to do things efficiently and effectively in the first instance. And I think we're lucky that we're a group of independent contractors. We dodge some of the employment standards codes that apply to employees and employers. But I still think the same kind of philosophy can be applied in a traditional employment setting. There's certainly room for bonus structures and other incentives that will reward people based off of their productivity and not just when they say they're working at home. So I think we're going to have to go much more to a value-based method of compensation, which might mean that your base compensation is not as high as it used to be, but it could open the door for those self-motivated people to really take a lot of bank home if they're effective at what they do. You're always going to have the issue where if you have ineffective people, whether you're in an office or working at home, they're going to have to be performance managed in some way. And I think you can just see that through the work product they deliver in the case of a more traditional work environment. And then you've got to make a conscious decision whether to let that employee go or whether they can be managed to fit the new culture that we're all going to see. But I certainly think that that incentive is the best way to get people, even the ones you think that are hard to motivate, motivated to want to deliver their work as well as they can.
That's a fascinating last statement. I think really like to get Jared and Lana in on that when we get to the Q&A, because I think we can dig even deeper on that one. Thank you so much, Roddy. We're going to flip over to Jared now. And we're just hitting the halfway point in our event today. So we're going to chat with Jared for a little while before we jam into our Q&A. Hey, Jared, how are you?
Really good. How are you?
Good. Thank you for joining us today. So for those of you who don't know Jared Smith, he is known by his friends as Squirrel, given his propensity to spontaneously pick up and chase dreams or interrupt conversations, apparently, which is totally allowed today. Jared, you can interrupt as much as you want. I think that will be way more fun. So have at her. I know, Jared, you've dedicated most of your career to supporting entrepreneurship and advising senior leaders in high growth, purpose-driven organizations. You've had an intense interest in community building. So Jared is the past president of the Entrepreneurs Organization, the Edmonton chapter. Most of you might know that as EO. The chair of the Edmonton Mayor's Business Roundtable. He sits on the advisory council for the University Alberta School of Business, and he's I love this one, you're a 2019 Lululemon Global Ambassador. What did you have to do to be one of those?
I have no idea, actually. It's
You have a great dancer's pose, right?
I look good in stretchy pants, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, let's just do this. Which one of these statements is false? Jared was named one of Avenue Magazine's top 40 under 40. He won the Entrepreneur of the Year award with BDC Canada and the Chamber of Commerce. So 2 things. He also qualified for the 2014 Sochi Olympics for dressage. And in 2016, he was recognized as one of Business in Edmonton Magazine's top 20 business leaders. I'm not going to tell you guys which one of those is false. You're just going to have to guess. It's really hard. Either way, it's safe to say that Jared is legitimate. Outside of business and community, his life involves traveling the world and seeking adventure with his wife, Jessica, and their 2 children, Maddie and Kai. And he's got a passion for fitness, as we know, due to his dancer's pose and yoga pants. And he's a 3rd degree black belt in karate, active boxer, and recently organized, and endured a year-long training simulation with US Navy SEALs. Is it too late to get in on that?
We're done. I'll never do that again.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to turn it over to you, Jared. We'd love to just hear some thoughts from you on silver linings and many other things related to today's topic.
Okay, well, fantastic. And I just, yeah, really appreciate Lana's comments and Roddy's comments. I think we could, you've given me a path for my future. I think I'm going to try to work for Roddy, and then we'll hire Lana and make sure that our human resources are well organized, because Roddy, you have a pretty fascinating business, and Lana, tremendous amount of content there. I'll take a little bit of a different tack and just share a story with you. We'll kind of go back in time, and I'm going to try and draw some parallels with this story. But about 10 years ago, I was part of a group of entrepreneurs called the Thunderbirds. And it was a leadership organization that had put this on for entrepreneurs. And it was all about kind of trying to up our game. And they had a variety of activities in an effort to allow us to do that. And one of the activities that this organization put together was an Indigenous sweat. And the participation was about 10 people. We traveled in our cars and our expensive suits out to this interesting site near St. Albert out in the country. And there we were greeted by this Indigenous elder who had really deep creases in his skin, and he had, his fingers were burnt from cigarettes, and he just looked like he had a much more difficult life than any of us could imagine. And he kind of looked at us and raised his eyebrows and said, okay, I guess we're going to do a sweat. And for those of you that don't know what that is, it's basically an opportunity where it's kind of an Indigenous ceremony where essentially you heat up rocks in a large fire out in a grassy field in this case. And there's a hut that's covered in hides and this thick rubber mats. And once the rocks get to a certain temperature, they put the rocks in the hut, and then we would cram into this small enclosed space and then endure some form of an experience. We weren't sure exactly what this had to do with leadership, but the Indigenous elder who greeted us said, okay, well, I'd like you to take your clothes off. So that was step one. So it was quite vulnerable. And we were in our shorts, standing kind of huddled together, feeling somewhat awkward about this whole experience. And he started to describe, what he was about, kind of his history, his background. He had an incredible story about hardship and alcoholism, and it was something that was very kind of powerful to hear it. And he said that one of the things that helped him was putting himself into situations where it's extremely painful and you have to suffer. And by doing that, you learn to endure change. You learn to endure what life will probably hand out to you. And his goal was for us to kind of find an opportunity to almost exit the mental anguish of this experience and find ourselves in a place of what he called ingenuity. And so after that story, we started to go through kind of the 5 stages of grief, I guess. Stage 1 is denial. We were like, well, this can't be that bad. And we're kind of, elbowing each other saying, well, let's give this a shot. And, we were kind of ribbing each other a little bit. And he heated up the rocks, and we went through a bit of a ceremony. And then we entered this hut, and we were immediately enclosed in this really thick smoke, very compressed space, shoulder to shoulder, around this kind of open pit in the hut. And he closed the doors, brought out his drums, and started splashing water onto the rocks. And as he splashed water on the rocks, this unimaginable heat started just pouring over us. And we literally started to suffer in a really tough way. It was very quick. And it was interesting to see the response of that suffering. He was drumming, the smoke was thick, it was burning our eyes, the heat was intense. And with every splash of water, it got more intense. And he started chanting in native Cree. And some of us kind of started to feel angry about this. How do we find ourselves in this? This is ridiculous. Others were still in denial, like, this can't be happening. I can't believe how painful and hot this is. Some felt huge anxiety, like almost like a bit of a panic, like, I've got to escape, I've got to get out of here. And a couple of our participants did escape. They left the hut. And then for a few of us that kind of remained in the hut, we almost kind of found ourselves in what I would call like a forced meditation, where the only way to endure this unimaginable heat was to actually allow our minds to just exit. And for me, I imagined myself kind of hovering over the hut and just observing the hut, and tried to remain as calm as I could and slow my breathing. And in that observation, I found myself kind of floating in the sky, and it was, intensely blue. And beside me was this like beautiful osprey. It was almost a bit of a vision, I guess you would say. And what was incredible about this space was it was fueled with creativity. I started thinking about connections and correlations and collisions that I had never pondered before. And when I came back to reality and he let us exit the hut, I had no idea that I had endured this for almost 60 minutes with some of my companions. And we got out, and the 60 minutes literally felt like about 5 minutes. And we found ourselves in this place where we were like contemplative, because it was like, wow, that was intense, but it was also remarkable in many ways. So the parallel I am going to draw on this is that in this time of COVID and other kind of global disruption, I've seen similar responses amongst my fellow entrepreneurs, and call them entrepreneurial-minded individuals that I like to spend my time with, and people that are leading the charge as employees in their organizations. And that some people, have been living in a denial. Some people are just angry about the whole thing and very negative. Some people have fallen into, some depression. I think it's caused significant mental health issues, a lot of anxiety. A lot of people are just saying they can't focus. They're very anxious. But there are some people that have found themselves in that blue sky of ingenuity. And I think it's very inspiring. It's really cool to see. A few of the organizations that I'm working with right now as an advisor are good examples of that. And one is Lloyd Sad Insurance Group and Navicord Insurance Group. And they quickly said, well, you know what, we could panic, or we could, talk about risk management, which is what this is. And we could actually lead the charge on behalf of our clients as their risk manager and help them figure out a path through this. So it was a huge pivot for them, and it's really resulted in a lot of interesting opportunities. A company called SureHire does drug and alcohol testing, and they are now supporting kind of a back to work initiative for their clients to add. They bolted on PPE and additional standards for employees to get back to work sites, and they're out doing third-party testing for the COVID antibody. So they've really changed their game, and they're doing extremely well. Another organization called Connectus Global out of Calgary was doing geospatial work with industrial sites, and they've shifted gears, and they've invented a new application called QC Clock. And it's essentially going to help companies navigate the whole process and gather data around their employees and their compliance around certain issues related to, related to isolation, et cetera. But the point is just that, one of the things that's really powerful about our situation right now, to me, and the main message I want to speak to, is this concept of forced ingenuity. One of the things I think that is common amongst the people, the individuals that are creating, really interesting things out of this chaos and out of the disruption, and drawing new parallels and creating new opportunities, is they all seem to have a relatively calm, stoic, kind of pragmatic perspective. So they're almost acting as observers, floating in that blue sky of possibility and saying, you know what, this is interesting. Yeah, it's painful. It's fearful. It causes anxiety. It's gonna have repercussions that none of us can even predict. However, it's also very interesting, and they get curious. And with that curiosity comes invention of new ideas, new concepts, new ways of working. So that kind of concludes my preamble. From I'll just show a little video, and one of the things that I tried to do with my friend is working. So, okay, that kind of concludes my preamble. From a, I'll just show a little video, and one of the things that I tried to do with my friend is working. So, okay, that kind of concludes my preamble. From a, I'll just show a little video, and one of the things that I tried to do with.
We had a little Ed Sheeran moment there. It's like you were looping on a pedal.
Yeah, so sorry about that. My sound was on loop, but essentially that was just my son and I having this discussion about getting creative. And he said, Dad, you love to row as part of your workout. He goes, why don't we invent a rowing machine? So that's just a fun example of us trying to get creative. And that video was done by my 9-year-old son. So
amazing. Thank you, Jared. Really thought-provoking stuff. I like how our themes are weaving together today. We're really starting from a point of a lot of interesting and important information that's really helpful and pragmatic, going to, the story of an innovative company, and then capping it off with just this really wonderful high-level discussion and thought-provoking story that really inspires us to be curious, because there's just an interesting gift that we've all been given, which is a complete overturn of norms and a complete disruption that we really haven't seen before. So that's fantastic. I'm going to bring everyone back, and we're going to launch into a Q&A. And one thing that I've noticed here is that we've got two overarching themes, and that is that there's the right now and then there's the future. So we're talking about right now. We're talking to this group of YBGs and whoever else is listening about how we're going to manage the new normal right now, how we can deal with, Jared, you spoke about grief and like the 5 stages of grief, and that's actually something that we've all experienced to some degree based on how COVID has affected us. You might have been going about your day, maybe it's changed because you're working from home, or your spouse is laid off, or something's different. Things might be pretty normal, but you can't interact. And so I'll speak personally for myself. I've been working from home for 3 months, and I think it's great. It's definitely working for me and my company, but about a month in, I got off a Zoom call and I just broke down into sobs. I cried for about 10 minutes and I had no idea why. And I recognized later, someone who's wiser than me told me that I was just dealing with grief. I was dealing with the loss of the normal that I was so used to, and that I would go through the stages of accepting a new normal. So this conversation today about what are we doing right now to manage, and then what the future looks like, is really fascinating. I'd love to direct the QA to talk a little bit about right now, and then pivot into future, and really end on that aspirational, curious note about where we're going. So everyone, you can unleash your questions. I'm getting a couple questions through the Q&A function, which is totally fine. It's actually anonymous. So if you prefer to ask your questions through the Q&A function, go for it. Yeah, because I can see that there are some questions you might want to ask and you might want those to be anonymous. So that's absolutely just fine. I'm just gonna read through some of these and dive into it here. Okay, so this question is for Jared, and then I'd love for the rest of the panel to jump in after we pick Jared's brain about this. So Jared, you've owned multiple businesses and employed a lot of people over varying economic climates. What have you found that employees consistently need the most, other than money, to show up and thrive? And then secondarily, what are your thoughts on work from home? So what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big question in terms of what they need most. I'd say that the ones that I've observed that I work with that seem to be thriving and that seem to be doing really well have an attitude of kind of optimism and hustle, I guess. They're seeing the world, through the lens of this kind of like the glass is half full still. There's still these opportunities, and they're not really paralyzed in it. They're willing to actually dive into things. I think for everyone, there's a sense of fear, and we make assumptions around that. So for example, if you're a business development professional and you're trying to win new work, there's an assumption that nobody wants to talk right now. We're in crisis. Like, why would I call anybody? Whereas I actually think that business development professionals right now can really, win, because their competitors are also assuming that. And a lot of decision makers have a bit more time on their hands right now. And in times of change, you often take a look at your supply chain, you look at, your cost base, and you try to make some adjustments. So I think it's a great time to do business development. And so the employees that I see that are winning are the ones that are saying, yeah, like, let's check our assumptions. This could be a great opportunity for us. I remember one organization I work with is a leadership training group out of Victoria. And one of their employees, during this kind of like crisis discussion, where everybody was like, how do we, everybody was in defense mode. And one of the employees said, let's ask ourselves a different question. How could we make COVID-19 the best thing that ever happened to our business? And boom, there was a huge shift in the conversation.
Wow.
Everybody started getting super creative, and it was so empowering for everyone that was there. And so I think, every employee has the opportunity to ask that question right now.
Lana and Roddy, can you weigh in on that?
Sure. I guess we've been doing this for 3 years now, and I think the thing we've found to really get people motivated is finding a type of work that they're really passionate about. Money's all good and dandy, but at the end of the day, if you're not proud of what you're delivering, if you're not excited about, finding a new solution to an issue or helping to solve some sort of a design or construction related problem, there's no amount of money that's ever going to get you excited for that. So I think at the core of it, what we always try to do is get exciting work, obviously work that compensates us well, but we're much more motivated by doing design work that will stand out or stand the test of time, or really improve the process so that we can get more value for our clients. It's really easy to motivate our guys when those are the projects in front of us.
And Lana?
Yeah, I think trying to figure out what an employee needs, I think the first place is to ask them, like, what do you need more of from me, or for us as an organization? And I think it's going to vary. You might have some individuals where, they've got that grind and they've got that hustle, and so they might just need a stretch project and let them go. But for introverts or even marginalized people, they might need someone to put them on the radar. And so I think the first step is really never really assume, but ask them, what do you need?
Mm-hmm. That's great. And for the people that are listening, if you feel free to type into the Q&A the things that you do need and the things that are important to you. I'd love to be able to start reading those and start seeing some themes develop there. Again, it's anonymous, and it's just really, really interesting to see what are the themes and the collective values that we have, because it's surprising how similar some of us can be. That information is really powerful. So this next question is for Roddy, and again, we'll just get the rest of the panel to jump in right after he chats about it, but it's twofold. One, how does mentorship happen in a completely work from home environment?
It was a bit of a happy surprise for us, to be honest. We're a young firm. Most of our independent contractors are quite young, and we were worried about working on projects that were maybe out of our experience level or expertise level. We've been fortunate enough with the one side of our business being building solutions, where we help other firms utilize technology to be more efficient. Those are the same firms that are mentoring us back. So we've got a really good partnership with an architecture firm in Edmonton called ACI Architects, and they involve us on a ton of projects. They're involved in our peer reviews, where they're almost a pseudo part of our team, and we get a lot of mentorship through senior personnel there. And again, it's no different than the mentorship we would have received in an office. If we need to schedule a meeting with them, we either go to their offices or in true Holo-Blok fashion, meet them at a pub. Or if we need to call them or have a quick chat over a text message, it's that easy. So they've really helped us to still receive that type of mentorship we're looking for, and they're not the only ones. We've got tons of other resources, other colleagues that are either competitors or in different business lines that for some reason like what we're doing and want to see us succeed. So it's an easy position to be in to ask for some help. People are always, especially in Edmonton, I find, wanting to lift everybody around them up. So we just we exploit that as much as we can.
Yeah, absolutely. So the second part of that question was, how does company culture work? So it sounds like mentorship really does work if you're not physically together. There's so many different ways that you can achieve that mentorship. So then how does company culture work if you're completely remote? Now, completely remote, I guess you're talking about a pub. So you're still having some interactions. It's just that the real focused work is happening in a remote capacity, and then you're still getting together. So is that how the company culture is happening?
Yeah, and we do a lot of events throughout the year, and we try to, we take our company culture to mean something a lot bigger. We try to be as inclusive as we can. So, you know, every year we hold a barbecue, well, not this year, but usually we hold a barbecue just in a local park and get everybody to come out and meet the team. And it's a very casual thing that we put on. We're also throwing Christmas parties that we invite all of our friends and clients and family to. It's easy to build a culture when it doesn't feel like it's almost forced upon you, and you have a major say in what that culture is going to be. So everybody has that equal opportunity in our group to suggest something that they want to do, either as a team building exercise or with our clients or with our friends, or just, you know, sometimes there's individuals on our team that just need some support. They want to get out of the house and have somebody to chat to about anything. It could be sports, it could be what they're going through. It's less, it feels a lot less fabricated. It feels a lot less like an obligation. And I think it's really good for our mental health to know we've got that support group that's not somewhat superficial and guided by our employer, but it's true connection on more of a personal level.
For sure.
Yeah, just to comment, Jan, on mentorship. There's an interesting technology that I'm familiar with. It was actually, the founder was from Edmonton originally. She was a professional ballet dancer, and then she moved to Montreal. She started a business called Mentorly, and essentially it's an application that bridges the gap between mentors and mentees, and she's launched it with some national level organizations. It's a really cool application for organizations to use in this environment because it kind of sets up the standards for mentorship. It allows you to kind of record notes, and it uses a platform that makes the whole process, you know, relatively simple. But it also trains both mentors and mentees on kind of some of the protocols around what mentorship actually is or isn't. So that's interesting ingenuity that's come from Edmonton that is now one of her clients is Harvard, actually. So I mean, she's done some pretty cool things. Amazing.
Yeah, another great success story out of Edmonton, speaking about business development right now, is machine learning and AI company AltaML. So we might know, some of us might know them, and they're Edmonton based, but they have clients all over the world and very, very impressive global reaching clients, and that's sort of a bit of a homegrown enterprise. What's fantastic about it, and I've actually recently been in talks with their business development people, is, like you were saying, Jared, if you turn on that curiosity right now and you just ask, how can we delve into the silver linings and turn them into something that will work for us? Sort of like the Stoic tenet that the obstacle is the way. You just get right in there and find a way to make it work for you. So so that's wonderful that it's alive and well. And you know, the more we talk, the more I'm encouraged about the way that we can react to this with positivity and almost with a proactive mindset. I wonder, Lana, can you speak to that? Can you speak to the proactive opportunities that we have right now because of this current climate?
Yeah, I mean, I think even going back to, you know, culture and mentorship, I think just whether it's proactive or just leaning in, you know, and trusting that culture will change, but it could even be better through remote working. And I think that if your culture is conditional on sitting next to someone, you have to question your culture. And I say that because, you know, you look at even long distance relationships and you have this sense of belonging with someone else, even though you're not with them. And by not being with them, it actually deepens, right? And so I don't want to get all like, but I think when it comes to culture and that feeling of belonging and feeling like you're part of something, you know, more like a company culture, it shouldn't be conditional on sitting next to someone. And if anything, it widens and grows and develops even remotely. So I think, I'm saying I think a lot, but if you just lean into it and trust that our culture will change, but it could actually be elevated, I think those organizations will come out on the other side.
For sure. Okay, this is an interesting one. So how do you see the long-term changes to the way we work affecting succession? Is climbing the corporate ladder going to be very different? That's a really good one for the YBG demographic. Who wants to take that one?
Well, I can lead into that a little bit. You know, this speaks to a little bit of like the prophesizing that's going on right now. I actually I get a little nervous when I'm hearing consultants and leaders kind of prophesizing what this is going to look like and what it's going to mean for everyone. I sincerely don't think we know what this is going to mean. I know I've talked to people that are experts in economics, and they're saying the fallout of this is far greater than any of us could imagine. And that economic shift could have huge, far-reaching impacts on accelerating the gig economy and other things that Lana mentioned. So, but that's a prediction. There's also a different economist that I talked to that said, you know what, because it's a global shared experience, there's going to be a lot of forgiven debts, and it's going to be a blip on the radar from an economics perspective. So you talk to two different people, completely different, you know, totally one's extremely fear-based, the other one's like, it's no big deal. So, and they're both like, one's a lead economist for the RBC and the other one was an economist that was doing a paper from the US. So anyways, I just think that prophesizing, like, be careful with that. But I do feel like from a succession standpoint, there are some trends that this is accelerating. And one is kind of the flight to freelance and the flight to being more nimble and being a subcontractor. I think there's more subcontractors now than there ever has been. And I know, like, my industry, the marketing communications world, has absolutely been disrupted, and it was being disrupted before this, but the disruption is now accelerated. The number of major ad agencies that I know of globally that are now going either remote or it's purely subcontract, leveraging gig economy, is pretty astounding. So
Roddy, do you have some thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what led me towards even starting Holo-Blok in the first place was questioning whether I even wanted to climb that corporate ladder. And I think a lot of people are going to start to question that as well. I don't think that climbing a corporate ladder and mentoring are mutually exclusive. I think you can have one without the other. But I think a lot of people are going to start to see the stresses that these big corporations have had to deal with something like a global pandemic. It's got to suck to be in the C-suite for some of these companies that have thousands and tens of thousands of people relying on them and a ton of uncertainty. It's just, it would make me sick to my stomach. I would hate to be at the top of these organizations right now. And I think a lot of people are going to start to question what's valuable to them, just like the Mexican fisherman. Is it worth climbing that ladder? What's the end goal? Is it just to say that you were there and now you have a seven-figure salary, or are there other things that are more important to you? I think Jared's absolutely right that you're going to see a lot more people shifting into subcontracting in the gig economy, especially with what Lana was saying earlier about you've basically erased any geographical limits of talent. You can go anywhere, find the right expert to bring onto your project for that single purpose, drive a ton of the overhead waste and operational waste out of the process, and have a bigger pie to split with the people actually delivering the work. So I agree that nobody really knows what this is going to look like, but I still think there's tons of opportunity for mentorship. Edmonton's such a close-knit design and construction community. If you want a mentor, you'll find one without any trouble. If you want to climb a corporate ladder, then I still think there's opportunities to do it. You're just going to have to evaluate what direction that company needs to go. You're going to have to work really hard to make a good business case of certain policies and measures to adjust your company for the new normal. But you better have a crystal ball if you're looking at those positions, because one person's going to get it right, and I think 1,000 people are going to get it wrong.
Interesting. So it's we've got about 10 minutes left of the Q&A before we start wrapping up here, and we're going to start shifting into sort of that future focused. Now, we're not going to prophesize because we can't do that. It's true. I appreciate that comment, Jared. Really anything could happen, but I guess what we do know is that trends that were already in place are really just sped up, and they're really just exploding now in terms of they're happening right now. I know that there's some things that we've seen that were planned to happen. For example, something I'm involved with was doing a transition from one software provider to another, and there was a very long transition period planned for, and something happened, and we had to make that transition period in literally 3 days rather than many months, and it happened. It worked. So sometimes that pressure just creates amazing things. So we want to pop up one more poll, and the poll is just to give everyone a sense of whether you can actually effectively do your job at home. So you can see it's popped up right there. If you just click on one of those tabs, can you effectively do your job at home? So this is kind of in your current state right now with the barriers that are currently in place, whether that's that childcare wasn't available to you, or that you really didn't have a good tech setup at home or something like that. But really what you've been dealing with for the last couple of months, if you have been working from home, where are you sitting at? So we're seeing a bunch of responses come in here. Percentage is going up. Now this is interesting. In the working from home is really such a huge theme here. And there are a lot of large companies, especially in the construction industry, that they kind of need to be this big monster, this big beast that has all this this horsepower, or so we think. And of course, time will tell what really is necessary to do the kind of work that we do. So Jonathan, I think that looks like everybody. Why don't we close it up and see what the results are? Okay. I'm not the expert here. Lana, why don't you tell me what you think about this?
I mean, I love this, and I find it so refreshing. I think that's again where we're at this inflection point where people know that they can now, and organizations, I think, need to start recognizing that. I'm not surprised. I think that actually those numbers might change when we don't, see schools or daycare closures as well. Yeah, I think this is where we're at. And again, that's what that rock that COVID-19 sort of picked up. And now we're finally talking about it.
What about the rest of my illustrious panel here? I know where you stand, Roddy.
Yeah, no, I mean, sorry.
Go for it. We're all about interrupting here. It's all good.
Interrupt me. I was supposed to be the one that was supposed to interrupt people, Lana, but well, I'll just comment. Like I believe that I can, a lot of people can effectively do their job. I think, it was an interesting article by Harvard Business Review. This guy did this massive study, and he said that, when you have kind of two-way communication, or like two-dimensional communication, like this medium right now, he said you only pick up about 63% of what you get when you're actually in person. And so while, yes, I think that we can do it, and most people are like, yeah, I can be effective, I'm wondering what we're losing. Like, it's a question. It's not, I don't have the answer, but I'm wondering what is being lost. One of the things I have noticed is that events like this, for example, we get the content, but we miss those little pre and post conversations and interactions that I often, find incredibly valuable and sometimes life-changing. And the opportunity to kind of build and interact with people in a way that's more organic, and read their energy in a way that you cannot do even in a breakout room on Zoom. So
absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's certainly a lot different in the situation we're in, and I agree with Jared. You don't get the same type of information as you would in person. Like, for example, I don't know if any of my jokes were funny today. People don't usually laugh at them, but right now I can't tell if they are or not. But I think once work from home is less mandated by COVID, you'll start to still get those personal interactions. Your day's going to look a lot different. Right now I'm at home with 2 kids, and it's certainly a bit of a distraction, but you learn to become nimble, and you actually learn to be more effective in the work time that you have. So if you have an hour or 2 hours here and there, and you break it up with playing in the yard with your kids, or going for a run, or going to the gym, and you get back to it, I just have so much more brain power to execute what I was doing before. When you're in a traditional setting, you're like 6 more hours to go. I'll just keep chipping away at this, and the 6-hour task could take you 2 in another setting. So it's difficult right now, but I think you're building a lot of important skills when this mandatory self-isolation and social distancing is over, that you'll really start to thrive in a more unstructured work environment.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think with Roddy as well, Jared, I mean, we're almost talking like it's a zero-sum game between full remote or everybody's back in the office. And, you know, there's this hybrid model in between that I think realistically, that's probably what employers will be moving towards. And so even if you are working from home and there's that 60% that can, whether it's an innovation hub or redesign of what the office looks like, there will still be those opportunities to come in and meet with people and still have that human connection, or even just like a co-working station. That might be what an office looks like, where on that day, you're feeling that need to get out and you can have that option. We're going to be able to redefine that a bit more.
That's exciting. It gives a lot of people a lot of flexibility. I think the productivity game is really in focus right now. People are discovering the way that productivity works for them. Like, really, how many more distractions were you having in an office setting versus how many needs, like you were saying, Jared, do you all those little in-between things do you really need from that in person? So the hybrid model is really exciting to think about. I've got 2 more questions before our final panelist question. The first one is how to separate your work life from home life when the lines have been so blurred due to a mandated work from home. Tips, advice?
Maybe I'll start off on that one. I gave up on the first few months of trying to do that. I don't try to blur them anymore. I've just come to the conclusion that my whole life is just life, and work is a part of that. So, you know, I'll be pushing my daughter on the swing at the park, and I'll have to take a phone call or check an email, and it's not really an issue. You're getting a bit of productivity in there. Sometimes during the day I'm busier with my family, and I'll work a bit later at night. In the end, it's kind of a wash in terms of how much I'm working and how much I'm playing or living. But I think once you stop looking at such a hard distinction between work and life, you'll start to enjoy it a lot more. And I think that's the only way I was able to survive it. Otherwise, you're getting back into too much structure that wasn't productive for us in a design-based career.
And Jared, you've been kind of living this life, guiding things to the beat of your own drum for quite a long time. What's your trick? Do you feel the same or different?
Beating my own drum, or I mean, the reality is I really crave that social interaction. It's probably not a surprise, but I'm an extrovert, and so I mean, that's been challenging for me to kind of feel like my normal routine is I'd head to the gym in the morning and work out with my group of friends, and then we'd grab a coffee, and then it kind of set the stage for getting into work. And I liked having clear separation between work and home. I liked not having my phone when I'm with my kids and not checking in. And so I've actually just tried to create, actually, you know, despite what Roddy's saying, I agree with that to a certain extent, but I have tried to create some structure and just say, like, okay, kids, like, dad works from 8:30 to 12, and then we have gym class from 12 to 12:30. We have lunch together, and then I work from 1 to 5, and then we do something in the late afternoon. And I've had to kind of force some of that separation. Otherwise, I just feel like I get too distracted. But it's also because of that whole squirrel comment. I do have a pretty significant dose of ADD. So.
Yes, I can identify with that. So it sounds like the formula is really to each their own, but you have to be intentional about what works for you. Okay, last question before we wrap up here. What advice would you give for people in the first half of their careers that will help them create a competitive edge in the newly evolving labor market? So we talked about how we see things possibly changing, the gig economy. We talked about just, billions and billions of contractors maybe rather than employees. So how do those people who are kind of up and coming in their career create a successful competitive edge that makes them stand out? It seems like it could get very competitive.
Well, I'll take a stab this time. I think a piece of advice that I had received that I think could still work now is to understand and get really clear about the problem that you solve for an employer or for their client, and then get really, really good at that. Because when we look at these different options that are going to be available for employees, that's what's going to help you rise above the competition. You're not kind of at the whims of what an employer wants you to do, but you know what you're good at, and you're going to build that backpack to become even better and be able to charge potentially top price. My two cents.
My quick comment on that, Jen, is just similar, Lana's focus on outcomes. Roddy had said that they kind of compensate based on performance and deliverables and outcomes, not on the time spent. And I'd say ditch the politics, because in large organizations, it can get quite political in terms of moving up ladder and succession, et cetera, and being competitive. But I'd say ditch the politics, and you can step up into a leadership role if you're the most junior employee in this economy. I don't think it matters.
Yeah, I'll say that I received some advice early in my career to focus on my weaknesses, and that was probably the worst advice I was ever given. People want to hire you for what you're good at and not what you're not good at, and there's going to be somebody else who's exceptional at the things you're not very good at. So find out what that niche is for you, find out what you're exceptional at, and find other revenue streams and business opportunities that stem from either your education, your knowledge base, or just your personality. Because when you walk into a room, when you talk to a client about something you're passionate about and you know inside and out, there's no better testimonial you can get from any other client. So if you're able to deliver those kind of results at your specialty, like Lana said, you can write your own check.
I think that's advice to run with. Okay, last question for you three. And that is, for each of you, what are the 3 pieces of advice that you would give to everyone listening to help them manage their new normal? Roddy, you're just up, so why don't you go first?
Sure. I'll cite my good friend who doesn't know he's my good friend, Warren Buffett. Bad things aren't obvious when times are good. You only find out who's swimming naked when the tide goes out. Measure success by how many people love you. And price is what you pay, but value is what you get.
Beautiful. I'm so glad we're recording this. Okay, Lana, you're up next.
Holy wow! How do I go after that? I would say over the next 6 months or even years, as employees, I think it's important not just to react to what HR comes out with or what your organization come out with, but to respond and to engage with them. There are more avenues for negotiation going forward. And I think, just stay curious. There's a lot coming at us, and those that lean into it are just going to go with it rather than get left behind. That's all I got.
Beautiful. JS, you're next.
You're muted, Jared.
I'd say for the entrepreneurs, it's lonely at the top, so seek out your peer groups. For anybody that's kind of seeking a path through this, remain calm. I think we always make better decisions when we're calm. And the third thing is what my grandpa taught me: never turn down a free hot dog.
Good thing. Thank you so much to our illustrious panel. You guys are so interesting, and you really brought a very diverse breadth of expertise and experience to this panel. So thank you so much. Thank you so much to the YBG leadership team, to the education team that kind of puts this on. So Danny McAllister is that chair. We've got Patrick Williams from Stuart Olson. We've got Carolyn Osejek from PCL and Lindsay Munn with the U of A. Thank you to the rest of the ECA. This is what the YBG does. We're trying to create community. We're trying to create networking in a time where it doesn't seem easy to do so. So if you like this format, let us know. Give us some feedback. If you want to connect to any of our panelists, you can follow them on social media. You can connect with them on LinkedIn, and we can also provide you with their contact details if you need them. So reach out to us for that. And we're also here to serve. Associations are here to fill the gaps that are not being filled out by other things. So if you need something, if you have an idea for an event, please just reach out to us, and let's keep the community going. Let's continue to support each other, and let's with curiosity and with some really, really clear optimism, let's just go boldly into this unknown future together. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, Jen. Awesome job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You.